with Vikram from Benchmark Coffee Traders. You guys are brand new relationship for us. Really pumped to be working with you guys. So do you want to just introduce yourself and kind of talk about what you guys are?
Basically, Benchmark is a 6.5-year-old business, and the way it started is I have a family relationship with producers in Papua New Guinea. I call them cousins. It's a little bit more complicated, but it is an interesting serendipitous relationship. Our fathers happen to be best friends since they were like 12, before we realized that there's actually a blood relationship, which goes back to my mother's family in Malaysia. It's this like really like incredible thing. Anyway, I grew up with them, and they've been in coffee for about 25 years. These estates in Papua New Guinea were originally planted by missionaries over 100 years ago, about 109, 110 years ago, and then they were commercialized for export by an Australian business in the 50s, and then this family took it over about 25 years ago. So that's kind of the history of the farms a little bit. And Papua New Guinea being close to Australia, they started distributing directly to roasters themselves in Australia about 9 years ago. And so that was kind of the idea. I thought, there might be real potential for that in America. Definitely what I was noticing is the mid and lower level PNGs were what was asked for. They weren't interested in the top level, top grades. But when I went to around, in my own time to roasters like yourselves, third wave / fourth wave, coffee shops and roasters, I started giving out samples, talking about Papua New Guinea. The impression was sort of lumped into the general Indonesian region, which can be associated with, tobacco-y or leathery flavors. And so it was kind of this like self-fulfilling prophecy where the impression of roasters was, not terribly compelling. And so that was in large part why I was relegated to blenders and lower level kind of grades. So that's what importers chose to bring in, because that was what the demand seemed to be. When I started giving out samples of some of the top grades, the impression generally was like a lot cleaner and sweeter. A lot of that has to do with more rigorous processing, and we can go into a little bit of the processing later if you like. But it seemed like there was an opportunity there, and coffee. I think a lot of us also like gravitate towards coffee because it's a way to do well by doing good. So, for me, I think like a lot of people in coffee especially are compelled by that. We want something, we want to have a positive impact with our career. I've heard the phrase, I love coffee, but I love people more. So that's a lot of kind of like the ethos behind it. And basically the rest is history. It's really like reaching out, building relationships, showing really all the things that the coffee supports, helping to tell that story. Because I take it as my part of my job to represent the coffee and represent who it comes from and where it comes from, and then gather feedback and try to continually improve the coffee. And so that's also a really like critical piece of the whole thing, is that roasters have a lot of widespread knowledge about different processing in different parts of the world. The same roasters that want to work more directly with Papua New Guinea would want to work more directly with every origin they source from. And so you tend to learn a lot more about what's happening in Guatemala, what's happening in El Sal or wherever. And so you're like this nexus of all sorts of information. And then me knowing intimately like production issues at origin, I feel like I can, take a lot of that feedback and help implement it. And as you know, like creating good coffee a lot in a large sense is separating it from the not as good coffee, right? I think that's like the beauty of a relationship like this is I don't have the playbook. I'm a very open person. I want to work collaboratively. That's one of the beautiful things about this industry, is like it's full of very collaborative people. We're all just trying to put out good coffee in a responsible way that takes care of every stakeholder. And then we want to help tell that story. So hopefully more people support their local roasters that are doing a really good job and being fair about it.
You're touching on a lot of great stuff there. Did you have any real background in specialty before starting all this, or is this all just very much kind of asking questions, listening, and trying to kind of get your finger on the pulse, so to speak?
I'm an environmental lawyer by training. So I studied in Vermont, which has a really good, their school over there has a really good environmental program. During that time, I really didn't want to be a lawyer. But as I was like getting more into coffee, because also sleep was becoming like less available. That was one thing, and I was kind of learning more about it. I spent my second summer in Papua New Guinea. That was like, where you dive deep and learned a lot about it, and of course, like, fall in love with it. I knew about many of the social projects, but I personally wasn't intimately involved. And so when you see free housing, free basic healthcare, and then free elementary school education for all the pickers' children, and that's open to the picker children in the surrounding community. It's a very compelling thing to a lot of people in that community to be paid above minimum wage, above industry standard, and then have all these also social accommodations. So when you can see exactly where money is going to actual coffee production and these social projects, I felt like that hits my marks of something I'd like to be involved with and hopefully grow. So it's just an ability, to do things where all stakeholders are taken care of. We can really tell that story with 100% traceability. 85-90% of the coffees in Papua New Guinea are smallholder coffees, which are regionally aggregated. Traceability is non-existent for the vast majority of the coffee.
I'd like to talk about just like kind of the logistics of how this happens on the farm side and how everything gets put together. And I guess as part of that, how does that all happen, especially when you have so many smallholders? And I know you guys are working within an estate context, but maybe if you could give, just a little bit of context around that. But B, you're going in and you're basically pitching your family on creating a higher priced, higher risk micro lot line. Was that a hard sell? Like, was that a hard pitch to throw at those guys?
They trial things out, right? You can't put all your eggs in the basket, but I was able to, say, hey, if I can work backwards from this price that I think I can sell it at, I think I can purchase it for this price. And then it was a bit of a gamble, being kind of a new kid on the block and not knowing that many people. So took a small loss that year, but then we went for it. And then a lot of the people that, we weren't able to connect with timing wise or whatever it was the first year, we were able to connect with the second year. And I think we view ourselves more as like sourcing partners. We don't have to be importers in the traditional sense. Roasters don't have to just take what we have spot. Like, I want to work to create and bring in what roasters want. In the end of the day, we're all trying to do the same thing, which is deliver high quality coffees at reasonable prices in a responsible way. That's what's allowed us to make this work.
Cool. Do you want to talk a little bit about how, like, just what the coffee production system looks like in the country?
So, many small landowners have coffee growing wild on their land. People sell their cherry to cherry buyers at various cherry buying points, but also if you just bring a bag of cherry to the road, you will see cherry buyers come by on trucks all day long, right? On pickup trucks. So that cherry will get dumped into the back of the truck. People that can afford vehicles will be the cherry buyers, right? And then all of it gets dumped into the back of the truck, all gets taken to a mill, sold. Once it's regionally aggregated, most Papua New Guinea coffee is washed. It'll be pulped, dried, and then hulled and graded, processed through the mill to exporter, exported to importer, importer to roaster. So that means somebody might have been more actively managing their cherry, picking it when it's ripe. Somebody might not have. That's one, on quality. Two, no traceability means no accountability. You can't verify what anybody got paid. So you can't also align some of the incentives to say, hey, we'll pay a premium for ripe cherry versus underripe or overripe, right? And so the ability to implement better farm practices is not realistically manageable. And so single estates represent like 10% of the coffee in Papua New Guinea, single estate being your own field, your own mills. And in this case, they have their own export license, which to my knowledge is the only producer with their own export license. And so that was another like ability to kind of improve things, right? Okay, well, if I can learn about better farm practices and then work with my family relationship to implement some of those things, then we can really produce a higher quality coffee. And so everything's shade grown, hand picked, pulped same day, goes through a 3-day fermentation process, broken every 24 hours with a wash, and then a 24-hour soak to get more of that mucilage off. Then dried on raised beds, and then it's conditioned for 3 weeks, which basically they just let it rest. And then it's hulled polished. The little bit of silver skin is polished, graded into its various coffee grades. Goes through 2 rounds of color sort, and then finally 2 rounds of hand sort. So you get like a 0 to 1% defect. So very low defect coffee. So that cleanliness is literally a direct result of processing. I think like having some of that more intimate knowledge of like what are the real issues at origin, so that I feel like I'm responsibly passing on things and not encouraging our producer partners to pursue things that are going to be like not good for them. I think that's a really important thing.
As roasters, it's really important to be clear about expectations and to, as much as possible, pre-commit to quantities and pre-commit to what you want, and really not create that uneven expectation about who takes on risk and things like that. Like, especially if you're looking at experimentation, I think a lot of that has to come from someone saying, hey, I'm willing to put my money in on this, and let's give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but hopefully it does, and we'll bring it in either way. And,
Right.
not put that entirely on the producer.
Yeah, and that's like extremely considerate when, and coffee being the second most traded commodity in the world, like it's a big industry with big businesses, and the vast majority of them are more about risk shifting,
Right.
as I've been told, which is pretty much just like putting it on somebody else. And it's just it's really not good. And so a lot of times the most vulnerable in the supply chain are most taken advantage of. That whole thing, I mean, having that sort of consideration and collaborative approach is exactly why these things are working right now. And coffee is like great because even where you're doing this in a much more collaborative way and paying everybody at fair prices, in the end of the day, it's leading to something that's a couple dollars more for a bag of coffee, 50 cents more for a cup of coffee. So it's really like relatively accessible to a lot of people. And I think that's a big part of why it's just better. Why wouldn't you? Why would you drink some of the more traditional coffees when there's roasters like yourselves in the neighborhoods popping up all over the place? Nicer people, better experience, better cup of coffee. What's not to like?
Cool. Well, I think that's a good spot to end things here.
Okay.
But yeah, super glad you did this. We're pumped to be working with you guys. The coffee's really delicious. And yeah.
Thank you. We're here to support you guys. So, we're looking forward to working with you in the future as well.
Sweet. Awesome. Thanks, Vikram.